is a classic geopolitical issue, but as such, it is obviously multifaceted and extremely complex. And I think that you can appreciate how this has a domestic political component, an international political component in terms of diplomatic efforts, a defense component in terms of our safety and security, a technical issue in regards to what the technology that we can actually develop and deploy in a few years' time. And all of these things are somehow connected. This affects you, delegates. This is your existence and your country that we're talking about. And it is one of the main actors in terms of nuclear weapons. And this is an issue that I would like you to appreciate in terms of its uncertainty, its incredible amount of danger that it poses to you and to this country, and the challenge to manage the risks for this country. That being said, let's get started. Republicans assemble over here.
Democrats, other side.
I mean, the problem with the Obama administration is they're so flip-flop. They go between like we're gonna end nuclear proliferation for good, and there's going to be no nuclear weapons to like building new facilities.
Yeah, that's. Do you think your senator would be on board with the prevention versus continuing?
Yeah, they are in shambles. They're super outdated.
If the British decide that they're going to develop it.
We believe as a party that foreign policy is not about party. We don't have a democratic opinion. We have an American opinion that we debate on as a unified Senate.
Saying moving towards modernization is an essential step towards decreasing the amount of weapons present in the world.
They can no longer contend with our military conventionally, and therefore, even if we don't have nukes, they will require nukes to even be on a level playing field with us should any competition.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to Georgetown. Who can tell me what year the university was founded?
1789.
1789. What was significant about 1789?
Constitution was ratified.
Yeah, so the Constitution of the United States entered into force in 1789 when the final state had deposited its instrument of ratification. Well, it's no coincidence that Georgetown University was founded in 1789. There's a statue out here of Bishop John Carroll, whose back is toward us, but his face is looking toward the Capitol, even before the Capitol was erected, with the view that Georgetown was created as an institution to prepare people in the world.
With that, the Chair welcomes the Senate Armed Services Committee. We are now in session. The Chair is going to entertain a general speakers list for discussion of the nuclear weaponization item on our agenda. The Senator from Connecticut, Senator from Arkansas, Senator from Florida.
Bills like the SANE Act want to cripple our country and our ability to defend ourselves and create a dangerous environment wherein our nuclear weapons are starting to decay.
I would just like to stress to the committee that we work in as much of a bipartisan matter as possible. That is essential to our success, and I know that there are certain issues that both sides can agree upon.
It is important that we start from scratch, build up from the ground as a bipartisan committee, and use language that both parties can agree upon.
If we jump into numbers and specifically how large the budget should be, we will lose sight of the overall goal of this committee, which is keeping the American people safe, and that's something that we can all agree on.
And I think we should really be working on efficiency and what needs to be upgraded rather than what we can upgrade.
What we're looking at right now is a trend towards more tactical nuclear weapons, TNWs, which are being on the rise in smaller countries that are beginning nuclear programs. And what happens now is that we do not have the proper scalable retaliatory effect and deterrence against those nations. What we really need to look at is upgrading our technology to ensure that we will be able to combat any nuclear threat on any scale of the nuclear ladder?
I represent the Department of Defense. I also have years of experience studying nuclear weapons, particularly at Harvard, and I have experience negotiating with North Korea and the USSR in the 90s. As it stands, we have 7,200 nuclear missiles, give or take. The only thing that even comes close to that is Russia, at 7,500. No other superpower even breaks 500. So we simply have too many, and we should focus instead on upgrading those missiles, which would not cost as much as some delegates are saying, but instead limiting the number. And we would still maintain the power that we have, we would still maintain the scope of our weapons, we would still have a nuclear triad, but it would be a much more effective one, a much more efficient one, and one that is not as big and as cumbersome as it is today.
I trust our Secretary of Defense. And if our Secretary of Defense is saying that we don't need these many nuclear weapons, I can guarantee you that is the truth.
If we reduce our missiles by 1/3, we will still be nationally secure. So what is the point in throwing money just to increase our nuclear stockpile?
Countries such as Russia are currently testing hypersonic missiles that we do not have. That means that they're ahead of us in missile technology.
We have to take a look at our end goal. What do we want to accomplish? And then we'd be willing to, take a look at how much that actually costs.
It isn't nuclear weapons that deterred Iran. The reason why they reached a deal with us is because of the sanctions that we placed on them. So why are we investing in technology that isn't the most effective way of deterrence?
We have to think the same way that Russia is thinking. They're thinking that once we show weakness, they will not follow, they will pounce on it.
Mayor reminds senators that money is not growing on the trees outside. We need to conserve our money and go about this process of keeping our position of power in the most efficient way as possible.
Other countries such as Australia, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and most of Europe and the NATO alliance rely on our nuclear protection. But what if our umbrella starts to form holes and rip? Then countries are that rely on us are no longer going to seek our nuclear help and are going to start to try to develop their own nuclear arsenals.
It does not make sense to me that disorganized, ununified groups that we would try to be fighting against, that the best attempt would be to discuss with them or to negotiate with them. We do not negotiate with terrorists.
So we have to not just consider terrorist groups being able to obtain nuclear weapons, but also other countries who have good intentions, who might feel threatened, and who want security as well.
Narrowly passes. We'll do a 5-minute unmoderated conference.
What we need. Are we talking about modernizing our facilities only? Are we talking about modernizing the weapons that we currently have? Are we talking about doing research to find new and more modern technologies like the Russians are doing now? Or are we talking about modernizing our entire system?
We're talking about changing not only the weapons, but the actual policy that is being employed. This is something that we actually have ground to make up, specifically against Russia, against rogue nations like North Korea and Pakistan, which are able to operate without international regulations such as the NPT.
It is no longer about who has the most nuclear weapons, it's about how efficient these weapons are and how powerful they are.
Sometimes standoffs are the only things that can stop violence and destruction. We can't always turn to diplomacy, especially when we're looking at rogue states and we're looking at non-state actors. This is sometimes simply not an option.
Treaties like START, where we work with Russia to reduce arms, are all really great ways to work with the other great power in this world.
Russia actually has made it clear that they do want to work with us.
Our American military, the U.S. Army, is strong on its own and does not need nuclear weapons to make it 20 times stronger.
Number one, we're starting off with 2% for immediate destruction. 8% we're going to hold for a bargaining chip against Russia. It makes no sense right now for us to destroy our nuclear stockpiles when we can get something like another START treaty going with Russia to destroy them as a bargaining chip in the future.
The senator recommends that around, say 15%.
8% has been floating around, 15% has been floating around, but it's not really what the Senate is here to do. That is what you must act upon after we have come up with the negotiation with Russia.
We would love to move that 2% towards the 8 and have no immediate destruction at all if that is what the Democratic Party would be in favor of. Thank you.
Scalable missile options, scalable defense, and scalable deterrence is the only way that we can ensure our security in the modern world.
There is a concern of the accuracy of these missiles and how effective they are. And we want to do as much research as possible before we implement these.
We also feel that it is really not logical that the Department of Defense would produce a series of weapons that are not reliable. We feel that they, as a defense department, will do the necessary research to make them usable and accurate before they deploy them. And we would really like to emphasize that research is in this bill.
Something that I would press you on is to, instead of focusing on the numbers, focus on the reasons why you want these measures taken. So what is it about your policy that compels you to propose a 10% reduction in whatever? Okay? Is it, for example, that you assume that in the future there will be no other nuclear powers in the world? That Iran will not get a nuclear weapon, for example? Or is it because you believe that this money needs to be invested in other items instead of this particular thing?
It's easier to speak than it is to listen sometimes. And one of the challenges I would push upon you today is to think about what type of things you are actually taking down in terms of notes. As your fellow senators and other officials are speaking, what are you actually documenting from what they have said? Is your goal, when they have spoken, to respond simply to what they have said before, or is it to actually add some new thought that was novel beyond what was originally said? One change in procedure that the chair here is going to implement today, which is to institute a comments line where after each speech there's going to actually be a responding commenter. Those comments don't necessarily need to be rebuttals, they may well be, but they could also be highlighting some of the areas that stood strongly to them in terms of thinking that that position could find some area of compromise.
Right now in the world, there are 2 or 3 countries in particular which pose a grave threat to the United States of America. And those countries in my eyes, number 1, of course, is Iran, and number 2, North Korea.
The proper way to deter them from actually firing a nuclear weapon is through coordination with our allies, such as South Korea, increasing their missile defense systems, and helping to work with them to instill fear in the North Koreans. Because it is only through fear that we can deal with states which do not behave rationally.
But if I'm to send, my son who's in the army or other people into Iran without having tried every diplomatic measure first, I will have failed as a senator and as an American patriot.
We should try to negotiate with Russia and China for them to provide a significant security guarantee to North Korea to deter them from acquiring nuclear weapons in the future.
I'd like you to step out of the mindset that diplomatic relationships can solve everything, and that in this idealistic point of view that we should negotiate constantly.
I beseech this group to not endanger American citizens for the sake of diplomacy.
This body has already put almost 30,000 armed troops in South Korea ready to attack North Korea, as well as 2 nuclearly armed Air Force carriers off the coast. This committee has decided diplomacy won't work.
We believe that there are compromises to be made, and when there aren't, we can strike. But that means that we have to have compromise from everyone here.
And we need to work with Pakistan to secure their nuclear missiles so that the rogue terrorist groups there, like the Taliban, can't secure them and attack our allies and ourselves.
There are constant processes that do not necessarily end. Diplomacy is one of them. Okay? And I want to remind you that in regards to North Korea, we have had diplomatic efforts for the good last 30 years without much success.
The president can't just impose sanctions permanently without the support of Congress. Congress actually has to end up authorizing those sanctions. So this is where you see the pushback in terms of the separation of powers.
We know from their rhetoric, from their actions, that North Korea does not want peace.
We use our relationship with China to get them to use their leverage to get North Korea to curb down their nuclear arsenal.
Though China may be an ally and though China may have sway, they have already said that they are not on board with what we feel is necessary and what we feel is the step that we need to take to protect the American people.
We need to show North Korea that if they threaten us, they will not have a place in the future.
I think it's really contradictory and hypocritical to want to bomb North Korea and then not think that they will retaliate against our allies, which is what you guys want to protect.
If the Senate Appropriations Committee deems that we do need to add in more money for the safety of our people, for the safety of our nuclear weapons, to upgrade the facilities, and eventually for the safety of the international community, that's something that we need to do.
We are moving towards a more modernized, more stealthy, more effective fleet of nuclear missiles.
Target bombing means targeting specific nuclear facilities and military facilities, so to increase our chances of destroying strategic resources that the government has and not the civilians in the country.
Theoretically, hopefully a target bomb works, we destroy their nuclear facilities and all good at that. But after that, and if they do eventually get that capability, I have a feeling this is something that they're going to keep and remember.
I mean, they've already said publicly that their goal is to destroy the United States
of
America, so I don't think we can push them any further in terms of hating us. The feeling of the Republican Party is that the only way forward is military action, and that diplomacy has failed.
Yeah, also you should talk to Secretary Carter. He actually has historical evidence for why this is going to be a successful endeavor.
Fabulous.
Operation Opera.
Yeah.
Look that up, thank you.
Operation Opera? Yes. It was a surprise Israeli airstrike carried out on
which destroyed a Rockaway nuclear reactor and a constructor center. Okay, see? We've done this before.
For today.
It is of the utmost importance that our military has the most cutting edge technology, but also at the same time make sure that that technology works.
So if we were to develop a tactical nuclear weapon, which again we are not advocating for, but we know might happen in this committee, we would suggest developing the long-range strike bomber plane and the B-61-12 bomb to go along with that plane.
And if we do not advance our missile technology and continue to rely on gravity bombs, we will fall behind.
To move forward with this science, we need to be able to spend money on research. We need to be able to fund experts who can look further into it, make sure that it's safe for American citizens, make sure that there won't be duds, make sure that it will fall where we want it to fall. All of your concerns are being addressed by the funding that is in this bill.
The nuclear triad is the concept that we need weapons that are capable of being launched from both land, sea, and sky. And the reality of the situation is that if we cut down on the forms of weapons that we are upgrading, we will lose at least one of those three categories, leaving us without defense in a certain important area.
Based off of the fact that we're upgrading 55% out of the $1 trillion plan over 30 years, details that it's estimated to cost around $550 billion over the next 30 years.
The resolution reads, to improve security conditions in nuclear facilities around the world for the purpose of preventing thefts of nuclear weapons, highly enriched uranium, plutonium, or other components necessary to create a nuclear weapon by a rogue actor or terrorist organization. So the name bill is now up for debate. We're recognizing the authors for 3 minutes and then 2 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thank you to the Senate Armed Services Committee for considering this bill. So we are the 4 authors, 3 Republican and 1 Democrat.
And I would first like to say about this bill that we really do feel that it is bipartisan to its core. There is nothing in this bill that goes against anyone's policy. Its key concepts of modernization and efficient spending are things that we have all agreed upon since the very beginning of this meeting and this convention.
I believe that we did a very good job of cutting down the cost. This bill is estimated to cost less than $300 billion over the course of 30 years, which is a huge markdown from the $1 trillion over 30 years.
And we really do appreciate the consideration and your time and effort. So thank you so much for your support of this bill. We hope that it becomes law.
We had assumed that this bill was created as a deterrent to Russia, not to Iran. So kind of confused as to why it's even coming into this at all.
Currently, as it is in the bill, it's as a preamble and it's not taking any action.
So when we talk about our foreign policy in regards to nuclear weapons, it is essential that we address this country. It's not a news statement, it's not a surprise to anybody in the international community, and there is no reason why this clause should not be included.
This clause here does nothing to disrespect Iran. If we're aiming for better relations, we should not disrespect a country.
That clause is extremely ambiguous and rather confusing.
Voting in favor of striking the clause, please raise your placards now. With 26.
Oh yeah, but I feel like it's part of the medication.
Normally, START treaties negotiate over warheads. Okay, that is the #1 thing. The delivery mechanisms comes after.
No, it's an unfriendly amendment, and we'll now read it and then consider it for debate. To create a comprehensive bill regarding the use of deactivated nuclear weapons for nuclear energy. 1. Recognizing that currently 10% of America's electricity is made from primarily Russian deactivated nuclear weapons. In comparison, solar, wind, biomass, and geothermal combined for 3%. Recognizing that homeowners must pay more and more for heat with tremendous demand on natural gas. Business owners must pay twice as much.
So it actually takes a lot of money to decommission nuclear weapons. However, if you're actually making a profit off of this by turning decommissioned nuclear weapons into energy, then it all evens out.
This amendment passes. The highly enriched uranium for energy amendment will be added to the name bill.
We should focus on upgrading as much as possible. That is what this current bill does.
Again, we are in the presence of the Secretary of Defense, and we have stated before, 55% is dangerously close to the bare minimum required to instill American deterrence in the nuclear world.
All those voting in favor of the name bill, please raise your placards now.
It'll need to be a simple majority.
Okay, all those opposed? Oh, you do count. By a vote of 21 to 1 to 4, this bill passes.
Once the debate ends, did any of your viewpoints shift a little bit to how you, when you first started the debate? So for example, you really felt strongly against this position, but then you end up debating it for a few days. Doesn't necessarily mean you change your mind, but all of a sudden you broaden your perspective, you can see the other side a little bit more. And I think this exercise is very important because many of our actual senators, congressmen, don't ever have that experience, don't ever understand the other viewpoint, precisely because they've never actually considered it in any real form.
All of you do the current role that you generally play very well. Some of you are the people who are writing the bills and resolutions. Some of you are the ones who are coming out with the very big grandiose speeches and rallying your base. Others of you are more quiet, but always thinking about these issues and later helping to draft certain amendments and ask very poignant questions. All of those are super important. And to think about for the next debate that you do, try going into somewhere outside of your comfort zone and see if you can try to be that person. Thank you very much. It's been really a pleasure.